back to the Burgundy Skies Whenever channel. Thank you for joining me today. This is a special episode. It's a shorter one than the normal ones that we're doing on the channel. And we are interrupting basically our series on the Beatles albums. That will continue quite soon, I hope, with help. But because yesterday, which was the 8th of May, there was a final home video, well, streaming release of Let It Be, the documentary from 1970, I thought it was very appropriate to take a break from the series and talk a little bit about this important release in the Beatles catalog. Now, of course, I'm one of the people who haven't seen Let It Be in its original form, right, in the 1970s when it was, or early 1970 when it was released in cinemas. I'm pretty sure it was potentially broadcast at some point on TV in some countries, but I don't think Romania is one of them. And definitely in the 80s, when I was born in the 90s, there was no, let's say, known broadcast of this documentary. If it was really obscure. And of course, there was no home video release, at least in my region. There was, I think, a VHS release in the 1980s, but since then, this documentary has been basically shelved, and people have tried potentially to forget about it and bury it, because there were, for 30 years, I think, there was no home video release, or almost 30 years. Definitely no official DVD or Blu-ray, as all of the other Beatles movies have received. And so this has been now, let's say, corrected by this streaming release, as 4K restoration of the original documentary. Now, as many fans who did not have access to it, like I mentioned, in the very few windows when it was officially released to the market, I of course got a hold of it, I think in the mid-2000s via the internet, but the version that I got an access to, which I tried to watch, but I couldn't really watch all the way through properly, was in really bad video and audio quality. Like the sound of the conversations was very muffled. I couldn't understand almost anything that they were saying. There was no subtitle, of course, back then. And then the musical pieces and the, they sounded okay-ish, but definitely at that point they weren't like an enjoyable experience, and the video quality was abysmal. Even for the standards back then, which were like lower resolution, like HD was not yet a full-fledged thing for everybody. And so for me, watching it yesterday on the 8th of May of 2024, it was a totally new experience, because from my perspective, although I had seen sequences of it and I had seen most of it in that version on the internet maybe 20 years ago, I couldn't count as actually have seen it. I couldn't remember much of it. I knew, and I had the scenes of the rooftop concert, which were more widely available. I had scenes that were part of other videos, documentaries that I've seen, but obviously I couldn't really, tell the story to somebody of how the documentary starts, where it's going in through the middle, and how it ends. Well, we know it ends with the rooftop concert, but just in terms of a narrative, it was impossible for me. And to remember scenes, like when I first saw Get Back a while back, for me it was like completely new experience. And it's true that Get Back does have a lot of stuff that were obviously left out of the Let It Be documentary. That's basically mostly what Get Back is. But even that, when you watch it, if you had the memory, the clear memory of certain scenes in Let It Be, you will recognize their counterparts in Get Back. You will see the additional context, and you will put it, it will help you fill in the pieces that were left unknown or hidden after watching Let It Be. For me, watching Get Back was just a complete new thing, and I could recognize certain pieces, especially the rooftop concert, some of the scenes in the studio that were more widely available, like images that were widely available. And so for me, Get Back will always remain the definitive way of referring myself to the Get Back sessions, the Let It Be sessions, and even the Let It Be documentary. For me, when we talk about it, everything that was filmed, even the Let It Be documentary itself, I will always see it or consider it through the lens of Get Back. Now, I did want to talk a bit about the documentary itself, because watching it, and given all the reputation that it had, really, I don't think it's a bad documentary in itself. You have to think a lot about the context of how it was produced, right? Not how it was filmed necessarily, but how it was edited and then put to market, and the context of when that happened, right? There is, first of all, the context of those weeks of filming and recording that were part of then Let It Be, the documentary, the album, and now the Get Back documentary series. and those we'll talk about the context for those in a minute as well. But when I talk about the context of the documentary being released, it's a different one, right? Because it happened over a year later than it was filmed. Then it was released in May of 1970. So by then, the context around the Beatles had completely changed. You know, the sentiment around the Beatles was overly negative in the press and the public to a certain extent, within the Beatles themselves. So the way that this had to be edited and put out, I think kind of reflects that evolution from what happened during 1969, the early weeks. With all the tensions then, they were still a band, they were still recording, working together, having fun, and you can see that in Get Back very well. Then they also recorded one of their best albums, Abbey Road, and then things started to go more and more downhill quite fast. So by the time Let It Be, the documentary, hit the theaters, they were already not only broken up, but there was a lot of bad blood, and there were a lot of discussions, and even in the press and the public, you know, the vibe was quite bad at the time. And I think the documentary kind of reflects that as well, and the reactions to the documentary reflect that as well. Now, when it comes to Michael Lindsay Hogg, I think he did a good job as a director, putting and editing, you know, some pieces together and making a documentary. And the documentary, now that you see it through the lens of Get Back, it makes a lot of sense in some places. It does miss some things that if they were put in, and I'm not talking just about scenes, maybe scenes, you know, it could miss all of the scenes that it misses given the time that it has, you know, the 1 hour and 30 minutes basically. But there were pieces of context that it could have had, it would have elevated it as a documentary, I think. You know, to conclude, I think the documentary is a good one, and you can watch it and you can get your own opinion. It has some very nice scenes, and now that you see them in full quality and you hear them very well, you know, it makes all the difference. You have, especially in the second part of it, you have those musical performances, the ones recorded in the Twickenham studio, and then the rooftop concert, which now are looking very well and, you know, sounding very well, and they are very enjoyable. I think, again, the documentary itself, even with that very short time that it has, you know, the 1 hour and 30 minutes basically, could have been a more informative documentary, and it would have made more sense, even back then, if it had a little bit of more context as to what was actually happening on screen and what was the timeline of that. And I think, aside from other things which I will mention, these are the big things that Get Back really brings, right? And I'm not the only one, of course, a lot of people have said that probably. It's, you know, the fact that it provides enough context for the viewer to understand what they are looking at. What mindset the Beatles were in when they started, what was their initial target, what they wanted to do initially, and how they evolved from that to what happened in the end, which was the Let It Be album recorded and Get Back rooftop concert. One other thing that I think the current release of Let It Be does better is it introduces, at the beginning of the movie, you'll see on Disney Plus if you watch it, there is a short sort of interview or discussion between Peter Jackson, the guy who directed the Get Back documentary series, and also whose team, you know, brought back and restored all of this footage, including Let It Be documentary now, and Michael Lindsay Hogg, the director of Let It Be. And, you know, it's a kind of a short discussion. I do hope that in future video releases, home releases, which will most probably follow with Let It Be being released finally on proper home video on Blu-ray, I hope they will, as a small parenthesis, I do hope that they will make a combined release between the two Get Back, Let It Be, and kind of wash their sins that they had with the Get Back release on Blu-ray, which was, you know, the video quality is perfect, but the release itself is quite abysmal. It includes nothing. It's called a collector's edition, but it has almost nothing to call it a collector's edition. But I hope that they will do a combined release where they have both documentaries included, and I hope on that release they will include some extra special features. Because even though, of course, Get Back can be considered like a super extended edition of Let It Be, there's a lot that they can still include. And I'm not talking necessarily about scenes that were filmed, maybe those as well, but interviews and discussion and featurettes which will focus around how these two pieces of historical Beatles cinema were made. So the first one being Let It Be itself, and if we can, as much as we have them around, right, some interviews with Michael Lindsay Hogg and other people around it to kind of explain more, especially now in the context of what we got from Get Back. But then also from Peter Jackson and his team, you know, especially Peter Jackson went a lot on video, you know, with different TV shows and internet interviews and so on that he's done in the past few years, to kind of talk a little bit about the process around Get Back, but it would be interesting to have more of that, you know, more aggregated in special features in a home video. So yeah, I do hope that a combined release between the two will happen sometime sooner, that it will be better thought out and put out than the Get Back one was on Blu-ray. Now, when it comes to the documentary, like I said, I see it as a decent, pretty good documentary. It's clear Michael Lindsay Hogg knew what he was doing, especially when he was filming, and you can see it in Get Back more, that he was kind of guiding the Beatles and guiding people that were involved in the production towards something. He as a director, he was thinking correctly that he wants to have an end result of what they were doing, that he wants to have a narrative to what he was filming. And he kind of tried to do that a lot, and to a certain extent he succeeded, and I think Get Back does a good thing, does a good job in showing all of that. Right? In Let It Be, you can see just snippets of that. Again, a little bit of written context would have helped here and there to let people know what was happening, because they can kind of cut from things. You don't know when things are happening. You don't know if they're chronological. You see them move at some point from Twickenham to Apple Studios. You don't know how that happened. You don't know how they got to the point to do the rooftop concert. None of that is really clear from Let It Be, and Get Back, of course, helped us with that a lot. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad documentary. Again, what I think people should do is to see it through the lens of what was happening in 1970 rather than what was happening in 1969, early 69. And what was happening after the Beatles breakup. And what I see it as two things. One is a very important historical piece, because again, that documentary I think speaks more to the context around the Beatles after their breakup and when the album and the movie were released. And the second thing, of course, without it and without everything that Michael Lindsay Hogg filmed and tried to record as sound, you know, the conversations that were not, Beatles did not know that they were recorded. All of those things, of course, are the base for Get Back. Get Back could not have existed, no matter how skillful Peter Jackson and his team were, without Michael Lindsay Hogg directing all of this to happen. So yeah, I do recommend seeing it. Just one more word about Get Back, because I haven't really talked about it so much. I had some references to it in previous videos, but this is one of the things that has brought me back, or just made me rekindle my love for the Beatles music, and kind of try to collect more and learn more about them. And so I just want to mention, of course, everybody kind of knows this already, but now it's more clear when you see them side by side, is that what Get Back does very well is that piece of context of the events. Now we're talking again about 1969. So because Peter Jackson has that very nice intro at the beginning of the documentary series, it's short, like it's just a few minutes, and you know, there are countless documentaries about the history of the Beatles that go into more detail, but this one, short as it is very comprehensive and very well logically thought out, showing their growth from them meeting and forming the band and getting together, exploding, the interjection with Brian Epstein, and then all of the things that happened in the mid-60s, right, when they were kind of felt forced to stop touring and stop playing in front of live audiences, the death of Epstein, they're sort of being in disarray a little bit, and then trying to pull themselves together and sort of manage themselves. And then you kind of see a little bit, you kind of feel a little bit that Paul was trying to keep things together. And they had that Hey Jude video, which kind of lifted their spirits because they played together with an audience and everybody was happy. They wanted to kind of replicate that, and that's how, despite their tensions during the recording of the Beatles album, the White Album, which was also one that they have bad memories of, and they didn't collaborate too much. And with the Hey Jude, video recording, with the audience around them being a positive thing, they want all of that to transform during these sessions, for them to play again together and record something live with a close audience. So you get all of that in just a few minutes in the beginning, and you immediately understand the context, you immediately understand the stakes that are at play, right? And then during the documentary, of course, you have this interludes of text that tell you, okay, this happened now, or this is preparing to happen, or this happened in the background, you don't see it, like after George left, how they went and tried to convince them a couple of times to come back, and the second time they convinced them, but they did it only by agreeing to move in Apple Studios rather than Twickenham. And then you also understand why they're there. You also understand how Billy Preston got there, and you see some scenes actually in the back that actually can work like a prediction to the fact that Billy Preston will sometime come into play. So you see all of those things, you understand how they got to the rooftop, right? How they evolved from what they wanted to do initially to the rooftop concert. So all of that context is so important, and some pieces of that context, not necessarily represented by the scenes that were left out, but by the text that was put on screen to explain, you know, something that just happened or was happening, would have made a total difference for Let It Be. I think they are what elevates Get Back. Of course, a lot aside from the quality, video quality, the restoration, the audio, and all of that. So yeah, for me, again, Get Back will remain the definitive experience for those sessions. But now seeing Let It Be in this new light of video and audio quality, it is definitely a piece of that larger puzzle that you should always refer to as well and look at when you want to see the full experience. Of course, aside from reading books and listening to the respective albums. I just want to close saying that as an album, Let It Be was anyway one of my favorites, because there were already some songs on it that I grew up with, so I just, you know, always thought it was a very good album, even though I think it also got a bad rap based on that, on the fact that, you know, the period when it was recorded, the movie being released after they were, and the album actually being released after they broke up, all of those were just surrounded by negativity, and I think that kind of set in into the album itself. But the album is really good. There are 2 or 3 filler tracks, of course, but there are some really big bangers in there. And we have to remember, and what I love the most, and people sometimes discount it, and they only think and refer to A Day in the Life or Strawberry Fields or whatever, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. They seem to forget that this sort of rock and roll bluesy type of music was what the Beatles actually were listening to as youngsters, and the ones that inspired them, and most of the songs that they were writing. There's a lot of that in Let It Be, but also in Get Back about One After 909 and the songs that Paul and John were writing as teenagers. So, you know, for me, it's excellent to see them, you know, in their late 20s, near the end of their tenure as the Beatles, engaging in those, and some of them being written then and clearly inspired by this older time rock and roll or blues music, and then kind of them enjoying it. And some of them are really good songs, you know. So Get Back for me, even Don't Let Me Down, I've got a feeling there are really good songs, although not both of them were included on the album, but, you know, just as an idea. I said before, I love I Me Mine, despite what everyone says. I think it's a very deep song, and it has simple lyrics, but they are lyrics that, you know, encapsulate a lot of meaning, I think. And the music is unique, you know, the way that a waltz is put on kind of rock music. It's really interesting to me musically as well. Let It Be and The Long and Winding Road are beautiful songs. You know, for Across the Universe, again, I think it's a masterpiece. So there's a lot of good music on there, and Get Back itself is one of the best rocker songs that they have, I think. So yeah, I love this album, and consequently, of course, for me, every watch of Get Back or Let It Be will be enjoyable. Now, I thank you very much for joining us on the Burgundy Skies Whenever channel today for this impromptu video on Let It Be and Get Back. I hope you get a chance to watch it if you haven't, and I'm very interested for those of you who have seen it a few times before, Let It Be, I mean, in, you know, in the cinema if you had the chance in the 1970s, or on home video, or the bootlegs that circled around. How do you feel about it now after seeing this restored version? And please do let me know your opinions on that in the comments. I'm super interested, especially, you know, from fans who had a chance to see this before. I want to assure you that, again, we will continue with the series on the albums. Help is next. I was just waiting for another version of a Help record to kind of compare the others to. I hope we'll be able to do that very soon. Then Rubber Soul comes, that's my favorite one, and it will be a very special video for me. But until then, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Thank you if you are watching, liking, sharing, and especially subscribing. That helps a lot. Have a nice time watching Let It Be and Get Back if you have a chance, and I'll see you next time.